When someone mentions thriving Jewish communities, the mind usually travels to Brooklyn or Manhattan, but walk down certain streets in North London on a Friday afternoon, and you might wonder whether Britain has quietly built something comparable. The 2021 census recorded 277,613 Jewish residents across England and Wales. Researchers believe the true figure is closer to 320,000. Here are 10 towns and neighbourhoods where Jewish life runs so deep you might forget you are in England at all. Hey, before we get into it, if you love looking back at the good old days of Britain, go check out my mate Albert over at Albert's Old Britain. Trust me, he's bringing back memories you didn't even know you had. Let us begin in the place that most Londoners already know by name. Golders Green sits in the London borough of Barnet, roughly 5.5 miles northwest of Charing Cross. It is a busy North London suburb by any measure, but culturally it is something else entirely. It is the largest kosher hub in the United Kingdom. Walk down Golders Green Road on any given day, and you will pass close to 50 kosher restaurants and eateries, all operating under rabbinical supervision. The Hebrew lettering on shop fronts is not decorative, it is functional. This is a neighbourhood where daily life runs through Jewish institutions as naturally as water through pipes. The Jewish presence here began to surge after the underground station opened in 1907, connecting this patch of North London to the city centre. Then came the 1930s and the refugees fleeing Nazi persecution across Europe. Families arrived with suitcases and settled where they could find community. By 1959, roughly a quarter of the population of the old borough of Hendon was Jewish. The community has not slowed since. Census figures show over a 34% increase in the Jewish population of this suburb since the year 2000. More than 40 synagogues serve the wider area. Carmeli Bakery is an institution in its own right. Kosher sushi restaurants sit alongside Iranian bakeries and Korean supermarkets. On Friday afternoons, the transformation is visible from the street. The pace changes. Shops begin to close early. Families walk rather than drive. The neighbourhood draws a long breath before Shabbat arrives. The thing about Golders Green is that it feels both entirely Jewish and entirely London at the same time. Orthodox families in traditional dress walk past students heading to the Hippodrome. That cultural layering is not accidental. It is the product of over a century of coexistence in a city that absorbs everything and makes it its own. But Golders Green, for all its visibility, is not the most concentrated Jewish area in London. That distinction belongs to a neighbourhood 5 miles to the east, where the community is not just present, but all-encompassing. Stamford Hill sits in the London borough of Hackney, about 5.5 miles northeast of Charing Cross. It is home to the largest Hasidic Jewish community in Europe. The numbers alone tell an extraordinary story. An estimated 15,000 strictly Orthodox Jewish residents live at the centre of this community. The population grows at roughly 5% each year. Wider estimates that include overspill into neighbouring Haringey put the figure closer to 30,000. The area has one of the highest birth rates in the entire United Kingdom, more than 25 births per 1,000 of the population. That is twice the national average. Haredi families here have on average 5.9 children. There may be as many as 80 synagogues packed into this single area of East London. The history runs back to the great wave of immigration from Eastern Europe in the late 19th century, when around 100,000 Jews arrived in England. Many passed through the cramped streets of London's East End before moving northward through Hackney towards Stamford Hill. After the Second World War, the community swelled further with refugees and Holocaust survivors. Many of them were East European Charedim who rebuilt their shattered lives in these terraced streets. What makes Stamford Hill remarkable is not just its size, but its extraordinary specificity. The congregations here represent historical links with particular areas of Eastern Europe. The Satmar, the Bells, the Bobov, the Vizhnitz. Each maintains its own synagogue, its own traditions, its own manner of dress, its own memory of where it came from and what it survived. Each community keeps its own telephone directory. These are functioning worlds within London. Walk down Stamford Hill on a weekday morning and you will see men in black hats and long coats moving between study halls. Women push double prams along pavements lined with kosher shops. Children in school uniforms pour out of community buildings. The street signs are in English, but the life being lived beneath them draws on centuries of tradition that predate the city itself. On Shabbat, the transformation is absolute. No money changes hands. No work is done. Families leave the lights switched on from the night before because they will not use electricity until sundown on Saturday. They do not cook, write, or use the telephone. The entire neighbourhood enters a different mode of being. Visitors from other parts of London describe the silence as almost eerie. It is not silence born of absence. It is the silence of devotion. The physical landscape of Stamford Hill tells its own story. Narrow Victorian terraces that were built for small families now house households of 8 or 10. Extensions stretch into back gardens. Loft conversions push the rooflines upward. Every inch of space is used because every inch is needed. Property prices have climbed sharply, but the community stays because leaving would mean leaving the network of schools, synagogues and mikvehs that make daily observance possible. You cannot practice this way of life in isolation. You need neighbours who live the same way. That mutual dependence is what holds Stamford Hill together. It is worth noting that official census figures almost certainly undercount this community. Research by the Institute for Jewish Policy Research found 34% more Jewish households listed in community directories than were recorded in the 2021 census. Stamford Hill is even larger than the data suggests. The community faces the same challenge as every growing population in inner London: space, housing, room for families with 6 or 7 children in a borough that builds one-bedroom flats. That pressure has pushed Jewish families outward, north into Hertfordshire, east into Essex, and most dramatically, 200 miles north to Manchester. Prestwich sits roughly 4 miles north of Manchester city centre. It is the beating heart of the largest Jewish community outside London. Greater Manchester is home to slightly more than 25,000 Jewish residents, spread across the boroughs of Bury, Salford, Manchester itself, and Trafford. The community grew by 12% between the 2011 and 2021 censuses. Prestwich is where much of that growth concentrates. The town has 5 kosher supermarkets near its centre. One features a sushi bar where customers queue for freshly prepared glatt kosher rolls. Clothing shops cater to modesty standards. Several kosher butchers operate within walking distance of each other. A French-style kosher patisserie serves pastries that would not be out of place in Paris. In 2014, the Manchester suburbs became the site of Britain's largest eruv. For those unfamiliar with the term, an eruv is a symbolic boundary marked by a series of posts and wires, almost invisible to the untrained eye, within which observant Jews are permitted to carry items on Shabbat. The Manchester eruv stretches 13 miles and encompasses Prestwich, Crumpsall and Higher Broughton. The story of how Manchester became the second city of British Jewish life is often a practical one. London became too expensive. Families needed space and green. They needed proper Jewish schools within reach. In Manchester, they found all of that, along with an established community infrastructure waiting for them. Manchester's Beth Din was established in 1902, when heavy industry attracted thousands of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. The roots are deep. The education figures confirm this shift. Across the United Kingdom, there are now 136 registered Jewish schools. 91 of them are strictly Orthodox. Over 36,000 Jewish pupils study in these schools, and Manchester's share of Haredi school enrolment has grown from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 of the national total over the past 2 decades. That growth is visible on the streets of Prestwich every morning as school buses ferry children in uniforms between the neighbourhoods. On Friday afternoons in Prestwich, the rhythm is familiar to anyone who knows Golders Green. The quickening of pace, the closing of shops, families walking to synagogue as the light begins to fade. The eruv wires stretch overhead, invisible to most passers-by, marking a boundary that gives the community permission to move freely on Shabbat. Manchester's Jewish belt extends from Prestwich down into Salford, across into Whitefield, and south to Hale. But the community that most defies expectation sits not in any of these suburban comfort zones. It sits in a former mining town in the northeast of England. Gateshead. The name alone surprises people. This is a working-class town in Tyne and Wear, sitting across the river from Newcastle. It is known for the Tyne Bridge, the Angel of the North, and the long shadow of industrial decline. It is not known, except among those who know, for being home to the largest yeshiva in Europe and one of the most prestigious centres of Torah, learning in the entire Orthodox world. The Gateshead Talmudical College was founded in 1929. Today it anchors a community of approximately 400 families, all strictly observant, spread across a half-square mile, encompassing a dozen streets in the Bensham area. The community supports 4 yeshivas, 2 seminaries, 7 kollelim, and full schools for boys and girls. The origins are unlikely and therefore perfectly British. Jewish peddlers arrived in the late 19th century and discovered that the well-paid coal miners of the northeast made willing customers. A small community formed. The town's Jewish settlement dates to 1887. Then the yeshiva arrived, and the yeshiva changed everything. People who know Gateshead from within describe it in terms that sound almost impossible for a town in the northeast. They call it the only shtetl left in Europe, a functioning Eastern European-style Jewish community transplanted into industrial Britain. One of its rabbis, Rav Zimmerman, has described Gateshead as 3 different things at once: a community, a Torah center, and a concept. There are no attractions in Bensham in the conventional sense, no high streets worth browsing or cafes worth lingering in. There are yeshivas, kollelim, and seminaries. Students travel from across the globe to learn here. They do not come for Newcastle nightlife. They come because Gateshead offers something that almost nowhere else in Europe can: total immersion in religious scholarship, in a place so quiet and so removed from distraction that the learning fills every hour. What strikes visitors most is the sound, or rather the lack of it. Walk through Bensham on a weekday afternoon, and you hear almost nothing except the faint hum of voices chanting Talmud behind closed doors. Young men in pairs walk slowly along the pavement, deep in argument over passages of text. The rhythm of life here is not set by work schedules or commuter timetables. It is set by the study calendar: morning Seder, afternoon Seder, evening Seder. The whole day organised around learning, against the backdrop of Gateshead's industrial skyline, with its cranes and bridges and grey river. This tiny pocket of devoted scholarship feels almost otherworldly. From the austere intensity of Gateshead, we travel south, back towards London, but not into London itself, into the commuter belt, into Hertfordshire, where the story changes again. Boreham Wood sits in southern Hertfordshire, 12 miles from Charing Cross. It is sometimes called British Hollywood because of the Elstree film studios nearby, where Star Wars and EastEnders were both produced. But alongside the studio lots, a different kind of community has been building steadily for decades. The Jewish population of Boreham Wood now exceeds 6,100. That is up from just 3,900 in 2011. Combined with neighbouring Elstree, the community counts around 8,000 individuals. Across the wider borough of Hertsmere, the number of Jewish residents has reached 18,346. That figure has risen by more than 70% over the past 20 years. The draw is practical. Boreham Wood offers Jewish families something inner London increasingly cannot. Nurseries, primary schools, secondary schools, kosher food shops and restaurants, all within a town on a direct train line to central London. The Yavne College serves the growing community. A new Chabad centre has recently broken ground. Families commute to the city for work, but build their entire domestic and religious life locally. The growth is visible at street level. Estate agents in Boreham Wood now routinely mention proximity to synagogues in their property listings. New housing developments on the edges of town fill quickly with young Jewish families. The local Morrison's supermarket carries a kosher section that expands every year. On a Sunday morning, the car park of the Jewish primary school is packed with parents dropping children off for community events. This is not a neighbourhood in transition. It is a neighbourhood that has already arrived. Just up the road from Boreham Wood, the commuter trains thin out and the villages grow quieter. And there, in a place you would never think to look, sits one of the most remarkable statistics in British demography. Radlett is a village in Hertsmere, southwestern Hertfordshire. It has a cricket green. It has a Waitrose. It has hedgerows and detached houses with gravel driveways. And roughly 30% of its population is Jewish. Most British people, if asked to name the most Jewish place in England, would say Golders Green or Stamford Hill. Nobody says Radlett. And yet this quiet commuter village is proportionally one of the most Jewish places in the entire country. Neighbouring areas tell a similar story. 20% of Bushey is Jewish, 21% of Shenley, 36% of nearby Elstree, which actually has a Jewish plurality. In total, more than 26,400 Jews live in Hertfordshire, and 18,350 of them are in the single borough of Hertsmere. This is what happens when families who grew up in North London start looking for detached houses with gardens within commuting distance. The community did not arrive all at once. It built up over decades, one family at a time, following friends, following schools, following synagogues. The kosher section in the local supermarket is unremarkable to those who shop there every week. Jewish life in Radlett is not dramatic. It is simply normal. And that quiet normality is precisely the point. The Hertfordshire migration is part of a wider pattern. Jewish families moving north and west from London's inner boroughs into the suburbs and the commuter belt. 87% of all Jewish pupils in mainstream Jewish schools are now concentrated in Greater London and South Hertfordshire. The schools follow the families, and the families follow the schools. It is a self-reinforcing cycle that has turned this stretch of the commuter belt into one of the most Jewish corridors in Europe. But 3 hours north of London, in a city that once clothed the British Empire, an older Jewish community has been quietly holding its ground for well over a century. Moortown and neighbouring Alwoodley are the main centres of the Leeds Jewish community. Situated in North Leeds, along the A61. Leeds holds the third largest Jewish population in the United Kingdom, after London and Greater Manchester. In the Alwoodley ward alone, 3,270 Jewish people were recorded in the census. That is 14.4% of the area's population. 8 active synagogues serve the city. A newly completed eruv covers much of Alwoodley, Moortown, Chapel Allerton and Roundhay, with all of the Leeds synagogues falling within its boundary. The history here tells the entire story of British Jewish migration in a single city. The slum clearances of 1936 and 37 pushed the Jewish population of Leeds northward. They moved from the central Leylands area up around Chapel Town, then further out to Moortown and Alwoodley. Prominent members of the community over the decades include the retail chain founder Michael Marks, the tailor Montague Burton, and the philanthropists Marjorie and Arnold Ziff. The Ziff Community Centre still anchors Jewish life in North Leeds. There is a tension in Leeds that is worth acknowledging honestly. The community once peaked at around 25,000. Today it numbers under 8,000. Young people leave for London or Manchester or further afield. The infrastructure remains, but the population has contracted. Walking through Moortown, you see the synagogues, the kosher shops, the community centre. You see a community that built something substantial over generations and is now working hard to sustain what it has. What keeps Leeds going is stubborn pride and deep institutional memory. The Leeds Jewish Representative Council still coordinates community affairs. The Sinai Synagogue on Roman Avenue still fills on the high holy days. Families who have been here for 4 generations refuse to be the generation that leaves. They volunteer at the welfare board, send their children to the Jewish primary school, and show up for every communal event because they understand that a community this size survives only through effort. Every person counts. Every family that stays is an act of commitment. Leeds tells the story of roots put down over 150 years. Our next entry tells the story of a community that arrived the day before yesterday and chose the last place on earth anyone would have expected. Canvey Island, an island of reclaimed marshland at the mouth of the Thames in Essex. 72% of its constituency voted for Brexit, making it the 3rd most pro-Leave area out of all 650 parliamentary constituencies in the United Kingdom. It is known for seawalls, caravan parks, and a certain stubbornness in the face of the North Sea. It is not known for Hasidic Judaism, and yet Canvey Island is now home to one of the fastest-growing Orthodox Jewish communities in Europe. The story begins in 2016, when a young father of 7 from London named Joel Friedman and a handful of friends decided to try something radical. London was simply too expensive. Stamford Hill was bursting at the seams. On Canvey Island, a family could find a home for around £300,000. Most newcomers invested roughly £550,000, which bought significantly more space than anything remotely comparable in London. In the 2011 census, 183 Jews lived on the island. By 2021, the number had more than tripled to 661. Today, the community numbers over 1,000 Orthodox Jewish residents across roughly 130 families. A purpose-built campus houses a synagogue, mikveh, shop, and yeshiva schools, all under a single roof. The cultural contrast is extraordinary. Hasidic families in traditional dress live alongside retired Essex residents who have been here for decades. The local reaction has been largely what you might hope for from a small English community. Neighbours say they keep to themselves and mind their own business. Coexistence built not on grand gestures, but on the quiet British habit of leaving each other alone. In 2024, a Google Street View car passed through Canvey Island on a Saturday, just as prayers had ended. The images captured dozens of community members in traditional Shabbat attire walking home from the synagogue. Joel Friedman was among those photographed. He later said the images reminded him of famous footage from the old shtetls of Eastern Europe. Hasidic men in similar dress pouring out of shul on a Shabbat morning. Except this was Essex, this was England, and the century between those two scenes held everything. Canvey Island is proof that this story is not finished. It is still being written. In new postcodes, on new streets, by families who are building something their grandparents could never have imagined when they first arrived at Liverpool Street Station from Eastern Europe with nothing but what they could carry. From the marshlands of Essex, we return to London one final time, to the northern reaches of the Northern Line, to Edgware and Hendon in the borough of Barnet. Barnet and Hertsmere are the 2 most Jewish local authorities in England. The parliamentary constituency of Finchley and Golders Green holds the largest Jewish population of any constituency in the country. But where Golders Green is the high street of Jewish London and Stamford Hill is its intensity, Edgware and Hendon are its everyday backbone. The railway pushed beyond Golders Green in 1924, and Jewish families followed it northward along the line. The Edgware United Synagogue was built in 1934. The Kinloss Synagogue opened in 1967 with capacity for over 1,400 worshippers. Today, the area is home to the Jewish Free School and the Hasmonean Schools, institutions that form the educational foundation of North London Jewish life. This is where being Jewish in London is simply ordinary, not remarkable, not exotic, not a curiosity, just families living their lives, sending their children to school, shopping at kosher butchers on a Wednesday afternoon, walking to synagogue on Saturday morning. That ordinariness is itself an achievement. It took a full century of settlement and institution building to reach the point where Jewish life in Edgware is about as noteworthy as being Church of England in Surrey. We come now to our final entry, and it takes us back to the Hertfordshire belt, to a town between Borehamwood and Watford where the Jewish population has been quietly and consistently growing for decades. Bushey is a town in Hertsmere, Hertfordshire. 5,590 Jewish residents call it home. That represents roughly 20% of the total population. Bushey sits within the wider Hertsmere growth corridor where the Jewish population has risen over 70% in just 20 years. Bushey does not have 80 synagogues. It does not have the largest yeshiva in Europe. It does not have a dramatic origin story or an unlikely location. What it has is something more ordinary and perhaps more revealing. It has become a place where Jewish families choose to live, generation after generation, because the schools are good and the community is strong, and you can walk to shul on Shabbat morning, past hedgerows and front gardens, and feel entirely at home. That ordinariness is the whole point. When a community no longer needs to explain itself, when its presence is so woven into the local fabric that it barely registers as unusual, that is not disappearance. That is belonging. And belonging is what every community on this list has built, whether in the terraced streets of Stamford Hill, or the detached houses of Radlett, or the reclaimed marshland of Canvey Island. The map of Jewish Britain in 2026 looks nothing like the map of 1926, when everything was concentrated in the East End of London and a handful of industrial cities in the north. Today it stretches from Stamford Hill to Gateshead, from Prestwich to Canvey Island. It is suburban and urban, strictly orthodox and quietly reform, ancient and brand new. The broader numbers confirm a story of resilience. The Jewish population of Britain fell by 40% between the end of the Second World War and 2005. It dropped to a historic low of 275,000. But then, something changed. The strictly Orthodox birth rate began to reshape the demographics entirely. Haredi families now account for roughly 75% of all British Jewish births. Today, the population is growing again for the first time in generations, and the communities building schools, opening bakeries, and stretching eruv wires across suburban skylines are the living proof. These communities are real. The history is documented, and the story, unlike so many stories about Britain, is not one of decline. It is one of growth. And don't forget, if you want a proper trip down memory lane, my mate Albert over at Albert's Old Britain has got you covered. Go show him some love.